Okay, we are back. If you missed part one, where we discussed a law banning discrimination based on immigration status, you can find it earlier in our feed. I'm Angelique Rodriguez. I'm the policy assistant here at CAIR Washington, and I'm here with Katie Walker from CAIR Washington and Medi Abebe from Seattle Office of Civil Rights. Now we will be switching gears and talking with Medi about the City of Seattle's new law banning caste discrimination. We understand that this is the first part, we understand that this is the first of its new kind by a city in the US. So can you tell us what this means and how it came to be, Medi?
Right, that's a great question. As we discussed in the previous section, we have anti-discrimination laws that protect certain class of people who have historically suffered from discrimination. So on February 21st, 2023, the Seattle City Council members passed a council bill which added caste as a protected category under Seattle Fair Employment Practices Ordinance. And the bill went into effect on March 25th of this year. So caste is a rigid social stratification characterized by hereditary status, endogamy, and social barriers, and sanctioned by custom, law, and religion. So the caste system divides people based on their birth or descent, and the doctrine of inequality is at the core of the system. So caste really shapes one's access to resources, opportunities like employment, job, housing, or even marriage. So rights assigned by caste are unequal. So people at the top enjoying the most rights and privileges, coupled with less duties, while those at the bottom of the pyramid really suffer from discrimination and perform duties that are considered impure, pretty much having no right. So there is a stigma associated with caste, with this perceived social and intellectual inferiority, and often consigned to the most exploitative segments of the labor market. So the data shows there are about 250 million people who face caste-based discrimination. And caste-based discrimination can be connected to other protected classes like race, national origin, religion, and ancestry. So the idea is when you have these laws that, adding caste to existing protected classes means, again, it's a tool that really helps prevent more discrimination, and also helps housing providers or employers to come up with methods or policies and practices to prevent discrimination from happening.
Thank you so much. I was really struck by what you said about it is itself a doctrine of inequality. And I think that really underscores why it's such an important new law. I feel like you really covered why this matters, which was going to be my next question. So I wanted to come back to, can you tell us a little bit about how the city of Seattle ended up passing this law? Like, how did it come up in the council meetings?
Yeah, so there were groups of advocates that were arguing that this caste-based discrimination is apparent in the US, even if it is not something that we are familiar, because it's not something that happens or people might understand, right? So these are immigrants from different parts of the world, mainly South Asia, saying this is prevalent in the diaspora community. It's really impacting, people in certain, members who belong to a certain caste in their employment, housing, and it's really, resulting in social alienation, stigmatization, and really discrimination of a huge portion of the diaspora community. So that was the purpose why it was brought to the council. And these are a lot of activists and advocates that were fighting to end caste-based discrimination.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next question we have down is, which I think you kind of touched, you already touched on, but what are the ways that you see discrimination against caste happening in Seattle? So, yeah.
Right. So again, this is relatively a new case, a new law, and we haven't really received any complaint based on, one's caste. But for example, this can happen as employee who identifies as being from an oppressed caste being paid less compared to their other caste workers. For example, there is a lawsuit in California that was filed by an identified employee of Cisco who claimed to have experienced harassment because of their caste, and this is still an active litigation. So this is one of the first cases in the US to name caste, so that can happen. And then also, for example, it can happen during hiring. An employee might not get a job because of their caste, or do not get promotion, or get treated differently because of their caste membership. For example, if they are asked to provide more documentation, or if during hiring process. And then also in housing, if a landlord refuses to rent an applicant because based on an assumption that applicant's caste, or also in public accommodation, a customer cannot eat in certain restaurants or shop at certain places or stores because of their caste. So this can happen different ways in the city, but again, we haven't really received a complaint based on caste yet.
Thank you so much. I think those examples were really helpful for me, and so I'm sure they will be for our listeners as well. I'm going to skip our next question because I think you really addressed it, and ask instead, is there anything else that you would want our listeners to know or want to say about the new law banning caste-based discrimination? Again,
what I can say, since it's now a protected class, if an individual believes that they are being treated differently because of their caste, that can be in housing, that could be in employment or public accommodation, they can file a complaint with our office, and we will conduct an investigation. Our investigation process is, similar to any other protected classes. We look at all evidence. So now they know we exist. So if there is anyone that is experiencing, you can come to us.
And that is actually a perfect segue into our part 3. So we are going to take a super quick break, and then we'll come back for part 3, where we'll talk about what to do if your rights are violated.